Good afternoon. Please welcome Senior Data Protection Attorney, Microsoft, Andrea Simandi.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the sessions. I must admit it's a pretty overwhelming experience to be on stage after Amal Clooney, so we appreciate your staying with us for a hot topic, which is GDPR, Europe's new privacy law. And I have the honor to welcome our guest speaker, Enza Iannopollo from Forrester Research, who's a business analyst and also a certified information privacy professional, whose research very much focuses on privacy. Enza, welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. There is not a better moment to talk about GDPR than after lunch. I hope you got coffee and you are ready for this. And so let me start from this. Do you recognize the chap here on the slide? This is Nicolaus Copernicus, and I love to start talking about GDPR, telling you a little bit about him. Now, he was, as you remember for sure, that he was a mathematician that during the 16th century, he published his theory. His theory that says that actually the sun is still in the middle of the universe, and Earth and all the other planets just move around the sun. This was a revolutionary moment in the history of science, was the beginning of the Copernican revolution, but was also a revolution in terms of, the culture and the understanding of, normal people at the time where the Catholic Church was probably the only institution that people knew. And Catholic religion represented a little bit also their understanding of themselves, and having the Earth in the middle of the universe and everything else going around the Earth meant that that was the place of humanity and a projection of humanity. But if you change this theory to have the sun in the middle of the universe and the Earth and all the other planets going around, it required that also common people would readjust the way they thought about themselves. It took a very long time, and in fact, it was a revolution. Now, why I say this when I talk about GDPR? Because when the European Parliament started the update of the directive that we have today, they said it's going to be an evolution. We take current rules and we're just trying to evolve them for the current times. But in reality, when I see the work that many organizations out there are doing to comply with GDPR, and when I say that this work is touching on the governance, on processes, on people skills, and on technology, I can tell you that in many cases, more than an evolution, this regulation and comply with the regulation really feels like a revolution, a little bit like the Copernican revolution, if you like. What I also learned in these good 24 months working with organizations that are preparing for GDPR is that actually, for a business, if you embrace the changes that GDPR requires, there is no way back. It's a change, it's a discipline around data, mainly, that, there is no way to change afterwards. It's really a turning point. Just to refresh your memory, we mentioned it already, it's the General Data Protection Regulation. It covers the personal data of individuals. The enforcement of these new rules will start on May 25th of this year, so there are about 64 days left before regulators around Europe start enforcing these rules. And what is interesting to me is that it comes out from the European Parliament, but is not necessarily a European thing. And I say that because when I talk with many US-based organizations, they tend to say, well, this is not for me, this is for you Europeans. But this is not true. The GDPR covers organizations that offer services or products to the European market. And also those organizations that collect data from European residents, maybe to build profiles, for example. Even if these organizations don't have headquarters in Europe, they still have to comply with these rules. So there are a number of organizations that for the first time are looking at data protection rules with the GDPR. Also, very often I see a lot of emphasis around May 25th is the date where regulators will start the enforcement of these rules. And for many organizations, it's a little bit of a deadline. It's like, yes, I get to May, I do my work, I'm done. But actually, 25th of May is just the starting point, because GDPR compliance is not something that you do once. It's not a one-time effort. You get ready for it, but then you have to sustain compliance as your business operates every single day. It's about building compliance into processes and systems that touch on personal data. And this personal data can be your customer or can be your employees. And one example that I often use to talk about processes that have this compliance, GDPR compliance embedded, a good example for me is the privacy by design. It's probably one of the most challenging requirements in the whole regulation, and basically suggests that consideration from privacy and security have to be done at the very beginning of new projects, new initiatives. Then you have to understand the risks that you are creating if you are collecting and processing personal data. And you have to choose strategies that really allow you to mitigate those risks. Now, what is interesting to me is to try and use a more concrete example of what it means. Imagine that you want to create a new app to engage your customers. And maybe it's the marketing team that wants to create this new app. And so on day one, you will have your marketing team sitting down and trying to explain to the rest of the other teams of the organization, those that are involved, the business goals that they have in mind, why they want the new application, or the app for their customer. And then possibly you will have your data scientists that will help them figure out how much data, which kind of data we need. And remember, privacy by default is linked to that privacy by design is linked to privacy by default. That is, make sure that you're using the minimum amount of data necessary to achieve a specific purpose. But then in the room, you want to have security and risk professionals as well, because again, we need to understand the impact of this new app and the development of the new app for privacy and security. So which requirements we have to keep in mind, which sort of risks we are looking at as we're trying to create this new app, and in which way we can make sure that we are mitigating these risks. For example, once you when you start working with your developers and testers to make sure that you are testing that app, even in those environments, you want to make sure that certain considerations for privacy and security are taken into account. Maybe you could think of using pseudonymized data or anonymized data if it's possible. And maybe all the way to the delivery of the app to the market, you want to make sure that the settings that you are suggesting or using by default are protecting the data of your customer. Maybe you plan to use, I don't know, end-to-end encryption or certain sort of settings, again, that would allow this customer to protect their privacy as they use the new app. The challenge of this sort of, building a process like that, of course, there is security control and technology that will be, helping us to make sure that we are taking care and mitigating the risks appropriately. But what organizations are telling me that one of the challenges has to do with culture. Because for the very first time, you are bringing within the same, at the same table, right from the beginning of any new projects or initiatives, teams and people that have different backgrounds, sometimes different languages, sometimes they have different goals. And for once, they will need to sit down together and work together to make sure that they are protecting the security and the privacy of the customers' data that they are using. So the revolution in this case are really to do with the cultural impact and cultural change. And as I say, compliance is about, is not the work of one team. It's really about an organization coming together to meet these compliance requirements. But there is even more than that. You will need, and you will start working with a number of partners when it comes to GDPR compliance, because even, it would be great to have a single solution, a single way, a single product to make all of us, GDPR compliance weekly. But technology is just one part of the puzzle. You will need technology, but you will need also to look at the governance, processes, people skills. This means working with a number of partners for GDPR compliance. And so we need to get ready as well to manage this set of partners. And then my last, or what I call this guiding principle for compliance, this is what I learned working with organizations over the last 24 months in particular. Very often I hear, GDPR is so vague, is so uncertain, doesn't tell me exactly what I have to do to become compliant. That's true, but the reality is that GDPR is a principle-based regulation. It doesn't give us a list of defined actions that we need to take to be compliant. GDPR rather tells us the final stage, where we have to be, and then is the work of each organization to actually define the specific strategy to become compliant. It means understanding the risks that you want to mitigate and find out the best way of mitigating those risks. And so the starting point of every compliance strategy is really around the risk assessment and risk framework. Understanding the risks that you are trying to mitigate under GDPR is the foundation of that strategy. And I told you that this work means that there is not way back for many businesses that are embracing this sort of change, but there is no way back for customer either. We know, and this is a data point for, that shows us that 74% of consumers would say that they said that they would switch bank or insurer if their bank or insurer suffer a data breach. 47%, this is interesting because there is a lot of effort that we put into creating new digital channels to engage our customers, but then we have almost 50% of these customers that say, if I have privacy and security concern, I'm not going to engage through a digital channel. And this is also some of the quotes that I got from Forrester online community. We ask real customers about GDPR, and not everyone knows that we are talking about the general data protection regulation. That's good. But when we mention the right to be forgotten, data access, data portability, this is something that customers recognize straight ahead. And as you can see, they link that, the possibility to ask companies to be forgotten or for data access, they link that with their possibility to feel more comfortable, not only relating to that company, but using the internet in general. They link the possibility to use these rights with a possibility to increase trust between them and the companies and the internet. So there is a very strong expectation that this customer will be really using some of these data subject rights, but also consent, transparency. These are requirements of the GDPR, but these requirements touch on the customer experience and that trust relationship between companies and customer at the core. And so for this reason, GDPR, very often I say, is not just about regulators and fines. It's really about improving that relationship with your customers, improving the way they interact with your company. And this is why I very often say it's just a perfect storm, because it gives possibility to companies to start looking at privacy not just as a compliance requirements, but really as a strategy for the business. And here, I want to show what it came out from a study that we did with over 400 companies worldwide that are working to comply with GDPR, and we asked them, which are the benefits, business benefits that you start experiencing as part of the work that you are doing for GDPR compliance? More than 50% told us that the first benefit that they can clearly see is an improvement in the customer experience. And then, of course, better data strategies. Very often, starting to look at the data, do that data flow mapping exercise to come up with a risk assessment allows organizations to understand all the assets that they have, data assets, and maybe they were not exploiting those assets as they should. And also there are a number of efficiency in the way they manage privacy policies, security policy. So really a number of business benefits beyond just meeting those compliance requirements. And I here a few examples now of companies that have taken GDPR and privacy and have really tried to make it part of their own business DNA, the core value of the business. And this is interesting because this is Scania, and they build trucks. and you wouldn't assume that, they have consumer privacy as, one of their core value, but instead they do, even if you might think, well, this is a B2B business, it's weird that they are so passionate about privacy, but they are, because they know that even as a B2B, you are handling personal data of customers and consumers, maybe through your own customers, and so the commitment to protect this data is very strong for them. And when I talked to their CEO, he told me, yeah, GDPR is very good, but we are doing already much of that work that companies have to do now for compliance. This is part of what we do, is our understanding of doing business. And this is another example from a bank, a large bank. And I talked to the head of the digital customer experience at the bank, and he told me, GDPR is not my work. There is my compliance team that will be leading this effort, but I'm so grateful to the GDPR, you know why? Because finally, we brought the discussion about privacy at the board level, at the executive levels. Now everyone is paying attention to this topic, and look, he was given the task to understand how the privacy expectation of their customers will change in the next 5 and 10 years, and how the bank is getting ready to serve these customers with this evolving privacy attitude. And then an example here from Italy, just one, is about Assicurazioni Generali. They have taken privacy, they have made it part of their corporate social responsibility. I looked last year at the list of Fortune 100, and only 23 companies in that 100 have taken privacy, elevated privacy to corporate social responsibility. And for me, it's a great example, because it doesn't mean that privacy is just a compliance issue. Privacy is, again, part of the business strategies, part of the core values of the business. But if we go back to GDPR, so how many companies today are ready for GDPR? In a recent survey, we did this at the end of 2017, 30% said, I'm ready today. This is a global number. Even if when I saw this number, I was, wow. You might think it's a small number, but if I think about the amount of work that you need in many cases for GDPR compliance, well, it's not a small number. And I have to say that the fact that GDPR, as we said, is a principle-based regulation, and that many companies are self-assessing themselves today, in some cases, means that there are some companies that feel maybe more comfortable about their compliance than they in reality are. So this is why the 30% is there. I think from my qualitative experience that very often organizations have looked at GDPR, and maybe they feel comfortable about their ability to comply with 1, 2, or more requirements of GDPR. And so they feel, yes, I'm ready. But when you try and look at a comprehensive compliance program, then you find that actually fairly few companies have done that. So still a lot of work to do, even though there is not that much time left. And so one thing that I thought to do today with you is just to leave you with a few key actions and key recommendations for GDPR compliance. As I said, there is not that much time left, but here what I think would be a good approach for GDPR compliance. Run a gap analysis, trying to understand the gaps that you have between your current state and the state that GDPR defines. Now, probably 18 or 24 months ago, or even earlier, it had made sense to really run a gap analysis throughout the real estate of data that you have as an organization. Today, with a short time left, my recommendation would be to look into initiatives or data-driven initiatives that you feel present specific high risks. Generally, organizations start from processing activities that involve sensitive personal data of their customers as an area that they want to make sure that is compliant. In other cases, it's really about looking at those processes that involve a lot of third parties, because we know Facebook and what is going on is just one more of those examples, but it's very difficult to control and understand what your third parties are doing in the moment they touch the personal data of your employees, of your customers. And therefore, definitely there is an area where many organizations feel is an area to prioritize in terms of the gap analysis, the understanding of the specific risks, and defining the mitigation strategies. And also I see there are organizations that have processing activities on cloud, or they are part of big analytics projects, especially predictive analytics projects. They do feel there is an area where I want to understand the risks more specifically. And once you have chosen this area where you want to go and look to understand the specific risks, it's about prioritizing then your actions. An element that I believe is extremely important is the design of the roadmap for mitigating these risks. And I say that because GDPR builds into the requirements, the duty for organizations to provide evidence of their compliance strategies. It's not about, okay, I haven't suffered a breach. It is not about my customers are not complaining about my privacy practices. This is all good, but still, a regulator can still come and say, I want to be provided with the evidence of your compliance strategy. Show me how you are complying with this regulation. And this means that having roadmap in place, showing progress, showing there is a clear plan there to address these requirements will be definitely helpful for any organization that has to go through a regulatory audit. So that's very important to do. And then once you need to fill the gaps and try mitigating the risks you have identified, of course, security controls is one way. Technology can, of course, help us to become compliant with GDPR, but also think about processes is also about processes. And if I have to choose just a few that would be areas of priorities, as I see many organizations doing, definitely that consent and reconsent piece. As we have said, GDPR actually opens the door in a way to many of your practices around data handling to your customers. And that consent and reconsent is just one of the ways in which your customers are impacted by GDPR. And this is the way also that your relationship with the customer is going to be impacted. They are going to recognize if this organization is sending me some direct marketing, did I give consent to them to receive this direct marketing? They are profiling me. Did they have the right consent to do that? And believe me, consumers are just more and more aware of these sort of practices, more and more aware that they should be giving consent, and then they can withdraw that consent if they are not happy any longer. And also data subject rights. Many banks today, but also insurers and utilities companies, and I would say now across verticals, there is this idea that, of course, my customer will ask me to be forgotten. And the more I develop my digital channels, the more this customer will ask for data access, data portability, to be forgotten. So I don't only want to build a process that helps me to comply in the back end, to identify the right data assets, to delete, encrypt, do whatever I have to do to comply with the requirements, but also what is my customer going to see? When they come to my website, how is going to be for them to ask to be forgotten? And many are seeing this as an element of really differentiation. If my competitor is able to provide a process that not only is effective, but is also a good experience for the customer, they know this is something that is going to be seen easily, because you can compare easily how two companies are dealing with this sort of request. And because, again, these rights is not just about compliance, it's about the trustworthy relationship between a customer and a company. This will be part of that trust-building effort that you do as an organization. And then data breach notification. I have to say that because often we talk about breaches, companies are aware of this kind of risks. They understand that a breach, it's a very challenging thing to handle, especially if you have to report to your own customers that you have been breached and you have 72 hours to do so. So a lot of work today is going into not only the technical preparation for prevention, detection, and mitigation of a breach, but also in that aspect of communication. How do I handle communication with my customers if a breach happens? And finally, we need to maintain this compliance. As I have said, it's not just a matter of getting to May 25th ready. That's the starting point. We need to maintain compliance over time. Test the incident response plan. One of my colleagues used to say, if you don't test your incident response plan, you don't have an incident response plan. So that's a good place to start. Set up training and awareness programs. This is interesting to me because this is not new. I mean, we didn't need GDPR to introduce this idea of training and awareness programs for employees. But still, I see so many companies struggling to really be effective and successful to engage employees around these topics. But again, the regulator says training and awareness is already in itself a mitigation strategy. So it's important that we have those training and awareness programs, and it's important that we provide documentation of these trainings. And then, yes, prepare to demonstrate compliance is building your roadmap, measure progress, make sure that you are recording all the efforts and all the work that you do to meet GDPR compliance. And I don't think there is a best way to leave you than these thoughts. And this quote is something that I really like. Don't think about GDPR as just a limit to your digital transformation or to your digital initiatives. It's really not a limit. Managing personal data of customer and employees in a way that is more disciplined, that responds to specific rules and allows people to have control over their data, actually allows organizations to do more with that data and not less. And with this, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Enza, for this great and very practical presentation, which I think leaves us with a number of takeaways. And building on Enza's point, I would like to share a few thoughts with you on how GDPR can, in practical terms, serve you as a competitive differentiator, and how can really technology and also Microsoft technology help there. So this is the Drents Museum in Assen, only 200 kilometers from here. And one of the highlights of the museum is this, which is a prehistoric vessel. It's a dugout canoe. It's roughly 10,000 years old, and it's probably the oldest known boat we have. Now, whether this has been truly a watercraft has been tested with a replica, because some thought this was for feeding animals. People have realized very early in history that rowing together to the same direction in the same speed makes a huge difference. But it was only in the 15th century when the second boat, the Santa Maria, you may recognize, has managed to reach shore and basically discover the New World in the United States and basically discover America led by Christopher Columbus. So GDPR is very much like sailing. It's a new privacy law, but as Enza pointed out, it will require a lot of additional preparations. You want to go off sailing with the best, most modern technology, with robust security, and with a very well-prepared crew. Now, it's the same with the GDPR. There will be changes you have to prepare for, and you will have to be able to maneuver very well. As Enza pointed out, the GDPR is not very clear on all points. So we all know that. The European regulators have already published 10 pretty detailed guidelines in the past 2 years, and they're working on more. In addition to that, national regulators are also publishing checklists varying from 4 to 12 easy steps to follow, but we all know those steps aren't that easy in practice, and not to mention the so-called national measures, which allow for deviation on specific limited topics. So really, the nature of the sea is change, and weather, currents, and underwater cliffs can really challenge the most experienced sailors. So what does it mean in the GDPR context? It's really that it's not a static experience, as Enza also pointed out. There won't be a point in time, not to mention May 25th, when you can tick the box that you're ready and any regulator can come and test you. It's going to be a journey where you have to prepare for maneuvering in an agile way. So it's not a question that basically the GDPR requirements are setting the bar higher, but also bear in mind that Most of those data principles have been in place for a long time, basically since the 80s. Data minimization, purpose limitation, they are not new notions, but they are now elevated to a new level. So therefore, it will be essential to look through your own practices and make the best out of it, really make the best possible customer experience and make this as a competitive differentiator. Now, as Enza pointed out as well, we have similar experiences that companies outside of Europe are hoping that it doesn't apply to them. And they're asking the question like, okay, I understand it's so complicated, but is this really for me? I don't think so. Well, I think the bad news is that it would even apply for Santa Claus, not only because he's a Finnish resident with his main establishment in Lapland, but because his market is targeting the European Union. So think about it in that way, that a single employee in Europe or any customers in the European Economic Area will trigger the applicability of the GDPR. These days of the fourth industrial revolution, every company is a data company, just stating the blatantly obvious. It doesn't matter whether you're in financial services, in manufacturing or retail, education, government, health, in every industry, you deal with personal data. So what does that mean in practice for your organization? What are those changes which you have to prepare for? I mean, just stating again the obvious, that there are enhanced privacy rights introduced under the GDPR and the increased duty of basically protecting data. I don't think it's underpinned in any better way than really listening to the news every day in the past weeks, months, years about data breaches or new forms of data harvesting, which are challenging also regulators to apply the GDPR in a practical manner. So I think, again, back to the sailing metaphor, you have to prepare for the unknown. You have to have good mitigation plans in place so that you can manage those unforeseen circumstances and not allow them to undermine your business and cause reputational harm or stock price drops if you're a publicly traded company, and not to mention the fines, which are also coming. So in practice, this really means stricter controls, better data governance for transparency, and then really enhanced policies to take control of data subject rights as well. So how can technology help there? I mean, we had a webcast a few months ago where some of the representatives of CIPIL and Big Four consultants were sharing some thoughts and feedback about their experiences with discussing the GDPR with customers. And as you can see in some of the highlights from the quotes, sustainability and automation has been emphasized. Technology is a great avenue to reach compliance, although unfortunately there is no green button to click to make you GDPR compliant. Think about it as building a ship, that what technology providers can do is really provide you with building blocks, which are themselves GDPR compliant with built-in privacy. So for example, for Dynamics 365, we have 19 white papers already published on our Services Trust portal under the Trust Center. And those can basically be good building blocks for you to build your story towards your customers and regulators, why privacy by design has been implemented in all segments of the technology you're leveraging. We have committed already last April that all our online services will be GDPR compliant by May 25th when enforcement begins. Now you can say that's not a big thing because that's the law anyway, but we have actually started to work through and really re-engineer our systems and build those additional privacy and security controls in the systems. To give you an example, for our software development, we have been basically developing the so-called software development lifecycle, which then turned into an ISO standard many, many years ago. And now this has been something which was highly appreciated by the Norwegian regulator, who was the first regulator to publish guidelines on privacy by design and how that can be achieved in practice and call that as a best practice. And this is all basically backed up and supported by contractual commitments. So since September 2017, we have implemented GDPR terms into our online services agreements, the online services terms, which reflect the requirements for us as a data processor in enterprise cloud. And we continue to basically fine-tune those requirements as we also work through on how exactly we will be able to support your compliance in details. Enza mentioned the need for a lot of documentation. And I think if I leave you with one takeaway, that's really it, that documentation will be so important since the rules under the GDPR are not black and white. You will not be told exactly what to do. So what our advice is to all customers is that really think through your data strategies and then document everything so you can demonstrate best efforts and all the goodwill to regulators in case of any questions. So what are really the few steps to prepare for the GDPR? I mentioned already simplifying your journey, privacy journey, and also compliance journey, and leverage technology. But bear in mind that will really need a very detailed analysis of how that implementation works best for your industry, for your data flows, for your processes. Obviously, you start, and only 2 months ahead of the enforcement, you're obviously in the 30% who feel ready. But if not, and you're still sort of thinking about a couple of additional measures, once you're through your data inventory and risk analysis, and then you have identified the gaps, again, fully agree with Enza that you have to prioritize your risks and then leverage expert support. Microsoft also has a huge partner network who are very well equipped to help you through your GDPR journey. And bear in mind, every chain is as strong as its weakest link. So it will matter more than ever before with whom you work with. And actually, those conversations prompted by the GDPR are really part of a good risk management strategy anyway, and to have a more holistic approach about security. So I think it's fair to state that size will matter in this context, because companies who have the right resources and are serious about security and compliance will be better partners to basically work with, since the GDPR is introducing a shared responsibility model. That means that also for Microsoft as a data processor, by law, we will have a much higher exposure ourselves, and we will be sitting in the same boat much more than ever before. So I think that you should really look through your vendors and think about their capabilities and their dedication to privacy and compliance, and also track record. Microsoft has an unparalleled end-to-end view, basically, due to operating our authentications in like all the authentications, I think 10 billion authentications per day, operating a search engine, having a hyperscale cloud service, by having really private and enterprise email services in place. So we have so much data in place that it really helps to prepare for any eventual cyber threats. We operate a digital crimes unit, as you may know, where we work with authorities to help take down botnets. So all our capabilities and knowledge we build in our products. So I think you really have to look at those capabilities, how they can help to build your own compliance story. And to really close it off by calling out a few steps to take, which are probably sort of almost evident by this point, but you will see that in our documentations, which I mentioned, actually the services, tools we offer are mapped against these pillars, which are discover, manage, protect, and report. And all our products take Dynamics 365, various product elements, or Azure or Office 365, are highlighted a couple of specific features, take relevance search from Dynamics 365, which will help you basically for your data inventory and mapping. So to wrap it up, we truly believe that GDPR is a great opportunity to look through your data management practices. And as also Enza mentioned, if you take the right approach and make the right investments, this will be a great competitive differentiator to win your customer trust in your respective areas. So with that, thank you very much.